This PoetryPower video focuses on the prelude. Let's try and connect into the themes of the poem first. When you feel trapped, how do you react? And I've put some suggestions down the bottom that I see quite commonly in my own life and my own personal response to being trapped. To walk away, to use words, to panic, to plan, to fight. I think I do all of those things, although I don't tend to resort to my fists. It tends to be a sort of grumpiness that comes through. But being trapped, you'll have a specific set of responses, and I want you to have a little think about how you personally respond to being trapped. Once you've done that, we'll dive straight in with the poem. Now, I'll say at the outset, this is a long poem and a relatively complicated one, but we'll go through it afterwards and we'll pick apart the best bits to have a look at and to kind of deepen your understanding. It's actually a poem that I find really quite lovely and really quite beautiful once you get your head around what's going on. So, Prelude by William Wordsworth. One summer evening, led by her, I found a little boat tied to a willow tree within a rocky cove, its usual home. Straight I unloosed her chain and stepping in pushed from the shore. 'Twas an act of stealth and troubled pleasure, nor without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on, leaving behind her still on either side small circles glittering idly in the moon, until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. But now, like one who rows, proud of his skill to reach a chosen point with an unswerving line, I fixed my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge, the horizon's utmost boundary. Far above was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. She was an elfin pinnace. Lustily I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke my boat went heaving through the water like a swan, when from behind that craggy steep, till then the horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct, upreared its head. I struck and struck again, and growing still in stature, the grim shape towered up between me and the stars, and still, for so it seemed, with purpose of its own and measured motion, like a living thing strode after me. With trembling oars I turned, and through the silent water stole my way back to the covert of the willow tree. There in her mooring place I left my bark, and through the meadows homeward went in grave and serious mood. But after I had seen that spectacle, for many days my brain worked with a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being. Over my thoughts there hung a darkness, call it solitude or blank desertion. No familiar shapes remained, no pleasant images of trees, of sea or sky. No colours of green fields, but huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men, moved slowly through the mind by day, and were a trouble to my dreams. So, in the opening of this poem, the poet steals a boat. Now, you can see it there at the bottom of the screen. I found a little boat tied to a willow tree within a rocky cove, its usual home. Straight I unloosed her chain and stepping in, pushed from the shore. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure. And the first thing I want you to think about is, how could the power of stealing this boat make the poet feel? Jot down 3 feelings and have a think about why. Now, to deepen our exploration of the poem, we're going to focus in on 3 things. What does the poet want us to see and feel in this poem? How do they use language to present their message? And why have they shaped the poem in this way? This is a poem set in the Lake District, where Wordsworth set a lot of his poetry. Here we see a sort of mountainous landscape, and mountains, or at least cliffs, play a big part in the poem. He talks about the huge black peak that he sees, that kind of he feels gets between him and the sky, and is quite threatening, and he sort of sees it kind of hovering in his mind afterwards, that sense of the giant rock. So that landscape, that wildness of that landscape, plays a big part in this poem. This little picture taken from above shows how small the boat is, and that sense of one tiny little person in the vastness of nature seems quite important. He seems quite small, nature seems quite big. And the sky. Far above was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. It's quite a key quotation, as you'll see in a minute. So he feels the emptiness of nature, the size of it. The final bit, the final few lines of the poem, shift from real nature to something going on in his head. Huge and mighty forms that do not move like living things move through his mind. And he talks about that sense of something having been left with him, something like a memory or a glimpse of something big and mysterious. So, what happens in the poem? It's about a man who wants to escape his everyday life. He takes a boat out onto a lake and he experiences the beauty and awe, the wonder of nature. He brings back those thoughts and memories to his everyday world. How? Two things in this poem. Nature is presented as powerful, and nature is presented as affecting people's lives and offering them freedom. Why? I think the poet wants to explore the idea that human beings take power from nature. It inspires us and gives us freedom. There are parts of nature that we will never understand. Wordsworth described this poem as a poem on the growth of my own mind. The boat is a symbol of the poet's freedom, and the rock he sees is a symbol of the way nature shows us its mysteries. So let's dig deep into some of the language now. Here we have the first quotation. I unloosed her chain, an act of stealth and troubled pleasure. And if I was explaining this, I'd look at the verb, then I'd look at that metaphor of the chain, and I'd try to think about whether I found this a positive or a guilty quotation, and where the balance was for those feelings. Once you've taken some notes, unpause and we'll go on to the next one. Here we see the poet's reaction to the sky. Far above was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. I want you to have a little think about the metaphor and the idea of whether this is about freedom or fear, whether this is about God, why the colour grey has been chosen for the sky, what that might suggest. It's a complicated quotation. It's hard to tell whether it's positive or negative, and I think that's something that you should work through for yourself. Once you've had some thoughts on that, unpause the video and we'll do the last one. Here we see the concluding lines of the poem. But huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men moved slowly through the mind by day and were a trouble to my dreams. Here, lots of adjectives, particularly ones to do with power. You should look at the verbs and the adverbs and how these dreams and images are moving through his head. And then you have to think about whether this is positive or fearful, whether he's been defeated by this and he sees himself as really small and nature is really powerful, or whether he sees himself as inspired by it. Once you've come to some conclusions on that, unpause the video and on we go. Here we need to look at enhancing our ideas. We've got the sense here of inspiration and intimidation. Inspiration simply meaning a feeling of being given lots of extra potential by something, and intimidation meaning feeling threatened by something. And I want you to take a simple moment just to write me two sentences that use the sentence stems from the right. In this poem, the narrator experiences or feels, and in this poem, the narrator experiences or feels. Have a think about how the narrator experiences and feels inspiration and intimidation. See if you can explain those back to me. Remember, this is about enhancing your vocabulary, pushing the cleverness of your ideas through the language you choose. Once you're done with that, unpause the video and on we go. Now it's time to explain your ideas. Here I've chosen the most complicated quotation for you to have a practice on, but you should already have some notes on it. Flick the video back for some hints if you need to. There's also a poetry burst if you need some more detail. Head on over to that playlist on our YouTube channel. Here we've got the standard sentence stems and the quotation in the centre. I think you should give yourself 5 or 6 minutes to write this up as a really decent chunky paragraph, and then once you're done with the video and you've got some solid notes on the prelude.